us to read our preamble statement to start us off.
Hey, I'm happy to do so. I have hit the record button and I will share my screen. All right, I'm Janice Fox with the Tennessee Department of Education, the Middle Tennessee Grand Region Director, and it's great to be with each of you today. I want to begin with our preamble, just kind of get us started. So the Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you in this opportunity to discuss the state's formula. Before we get rolling, just talk through each of these real quickly. So bear with me as I read that. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consideration of what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula, while all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly. Documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. We'll go ahead with the roll call now. Kim Worley.
This is Tracy Smith. I'm standing for Kim Worley. She's not able to be here.
All right, thank you. Bo Griffin. I saw Bo there earlier.
Sorry, eating them oatmeal. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's noon here. Sorry.
Kathy Beck.
I'm here.
Dr. Vaughn.
Here.
Clinton Satterfield.
Present.
Bruce.
Here, Steve.
Dr. Towns. Tony Williams. Representative Hicks. Sandra Jackson. Representative Cochran, again, thank you for joining us today.
Yep, here. Thank you.
And Nick Darnell had let me know that he wouldn't be able to attend today. He had a previous commitment, was going to be traveling. So Nick will not be here today. One thing we neglected to do on our last meeting, and that was elect a vice chair in case I get hit by a car or come down with something and can't participate. So at this time, we'll open the floor for nominations for a vice chair.
Who's not here?
We need to respect the absent.
I mean, that's who I was going to nominate, who's not here.
So I'll nominate Clint Satterfield.
I said somebody's not here.
Any other nominations? Do you accept that nomination, Clint?
I will. I'll be here. I'll be present. That's all.
Right. Any other nominations? All right. Can everybody go to the where is it on this one? Oh, go to the raise your hand thing and give a thumbs up if there's no on making Clint the vice chair.
Let's see. Yeah. I'm trying to find it.
In the top right, and it has a little smiley face and a hand there.
Oh, God. I'm fine. I'll go with it.
All right, we got
Yeah,
you.
I'm sorry.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Clint, on being elected vice chair.
Thank you. I'll be present.
All right. All right, jumping in, we weren't able to get information from our previous meeting that we had requested. So what I want to do is go back a little bit. We had a chairs call on Friday and wanted to go through a few of those screens and kind of use those as conversation starters. So Dr. Fox, if you'll pull that up, please. And if we could go to the map, I guess first would be a good one.
All right.
All right, this was discussed first, and to add some commentary to this, you'll see that the states that are in the darker shade of gray are student-based formula states, and the ones that are in the lighter shade of gray are not student-based formulas. Conversation among the chairs and the commissioner last Friday, she recommended that we kind of stick to the Midwest states and the SEC states. So, you know, when you're looking at Kentucky and I guess Virginia, Arkansas, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, she did say that Illinois is the closest demographic match to the state of Tennessee. So as we're looking at, if you go out and look at their base amounts or whatever, and we want to consider that we would stick to those states and not consider the New Yorks and the Washington DCs and those other states as we're talking about through this, that we are more in line regionally and in the Midwest. So questions, comments on that, or? All right, if we can go to the first triangle. All right, this is potential components, as we talked about, a base that each student looks at, then weights, what is considered direct funding, and then outcomes. So as we go into that in detail, looking at the base, for example, as we said, we can look at those regional states and Midwest states and kind of see what their base is, what they have kind of looked at. We're also trying to get information on what the average amount per student is in the BP, maybe as a starting point. So just trying to think through that. If somebody else has a suggestion, I'd be glad to entertain that here. But just starting kind of with a base. I know that we talked about who should be included in the base. Obviously principals, secretary, we talked about SROs, talked about nurses, counselors, obviously teachers, those type things, but I think it would be hard, at least in my mind, somebody else may be able to help me understand how we would arrive at a number talking through who's in a building without determining the size of the school, the class sizes, those type things. So maybe, just kind of getting a starting point and seeing if that would, that number would apply and cover those positions in the school. I'll open the floor. Quiet group today.
You said
Steve,
nurses, SROs, excuse me. You said nurses, SROs, teachers, what else? Steve, did you say was
Counselors, I mean, all the people you think you would need specifically within a school. Are we going to look at a smaller ratio for K2, or does that fall into a weight? You know, I think those are some of the decisions that we can try to work towards how we want that to look.
One thing, Steve, I think that we need to consider on this base is we need to have it as large amount on the base as we can, because if we are going to be per student in every school district, what might be right for me in my pre-K through second grade may totally be different than what you need in your school district. So I think we've really got to be, I guess, I don't know what the word's aggressive here, but our base needs to be very large as far as that goes, as far as trying to take care of all the needs for those students. If we're going to do that on a per pupil basis, in my opinion.
Okay. Good thoughts.
I agree with that. I think that everything that's in the BEP should be in the base, is what it kind of feels like to me. Those RTI positions as well.
Right.
I think that's very important too, Clint. Also, those positions that we've had to fill without funding, I think those positions need to be in there, because, like I said, like right now, I know, I don't know about y'all, but in the Millington schools, our mental wellness right now, we're having more behavior problems out of our elementary kids than we ever have before, because they don't know, they've not been in the school for the last year and a half. So I think that's important as well, but especially those non-funded positions that we have to have if we are going to try to catch up our kids on this learning loss, since we put all this forward, that it needs to be in that base as well.
I agree.
I'm looking at the the expense per pupil in Illinois. Is that what you recommended? And it says average spending per student calculates both instructional spending and operational spending, and then they take the two and they combine it with an average, and they spend on instructional $8,800 more or less dollars in instructional, and then in operational it's $14,000. And so then I guess they come up. So have we thought about looking at it? If we're going to look at it like Illinois, that's what I'm reading, how they do it. Illinois State Report Card on Education.
Well, I think getting to that amount is going to be a lot more than the state is actually funding right now. I think that, if we're looking at percentages, for example, in the BEP, instructional expenses are 75% as a starting point. Other starting points is 50%. I mean, it varies with the four categories there within the BEP. So, if it is 8,000 and what was the other number you said, Kathy?
It was 8,800, so closer to 9,000 for instructional, and then almost 14 for operational per student. And then they take those two and combine them and come up with maybe the average.
Dr. Beck, that comes out to about $11,400, on average. But that would be great for a small school district like me. But what about a large school district like Shelby County? Their operational cost has got to be more than what it is for my 2,500 student district compared to their 114,000.
I definitely second that, Bo.
So you're saying it needs to be more than 11,000 per student?
And I think that's why it's important to look at the amount of money in the BEP right now that's being distributed to all the school systems across the state, and trying to come up with an average that we use, possibly that as a starting point for the base. Or at least that was my thought. Clint, you had something to say just a second ago.
Yeah, I just cannot, without leaving me, is the local match, the fiscal capacity piece, and trying to do the equity at the state level. And then Bo's answer or solution or thought is, what can the local do to catch that piece up? Because the places like Memphis are going to have more fiscal capacity than somebody like Trousdale, is what I'm saying.
I would agree. So it kind of washes that hope for equity right out the window when if the local match is supposed to make us all on an even playing field, Cheatham County wouldn't be able to compete with that either. We don't have a very large tax base.
I will interject this right now. There will be a separate meeting for superintendents, the boards, and funding body, whether it be a county commission and county mayor or city mayor and board of mayor and aldermen. There will be a separate meeting scheduled to talk about local match and those type things as part of this funding formula. So that will come, I think, at some point. But today, Dr. Fox, can you advance to just a triangle and it says student-based formula? Weight examples for our next point, but there we go. That's it. So there's the examples that were given during the chair's meeting, and I think this may have been in that first PowerPoint that we received. RTI, thank you for mentioning that, Clint. And counselors, nurses, school psychologists, all that. And I guess that's a question we need answered, Dr. Fox, is will transportation become part of this student base, or will that remain a separate funding model for transportation? We would need to know the intent there. I know it's got included right here, base transportation, but I think that needs to be clarified for us.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make that note, but, and this information, I just wanted to note, I'll put it in the chat, is also on our main funding webpage. And one of the things that the commissioner has spoken to is that the base is really going to support what every student would need, what all students would need across the board. So in that base category, so transportation would be a critical element that would need to be considered for all students to be successful in school. So definitely will.
Can I add one as a proposal, guys? So think about technology. So when I look at the current BEP, and I know this is not a current BEP discussion, it's a future state, there's currently only like $40 for technology. But golly, you know, a laptop costs anywhere from $600 or $700, you know, for our students. So I'm just thinking about what about things like technology, you know, for us to consider.
Very important. Okay.
Dr. Stern, let me ask a question. I don't want to, I mean, I say what they're educators, but does this include our administration in these buildings as well? Is that,
I think
I just
it
want to
has
make sure, because that's going to be a question that's going to come across as, well, you know, I have that at CEO. Well, you know, I have an educational license, but no, it's a little different. But I just want to make sure, but educators do cover the administrative costs in the building as well, correct?
I would think so, that every school is required to have a principal. So,
yes, sir. I just want to make sure.
and you know, when we look at the study from the comptroller's office, one of the most underfunded positions is assistant principals. So I think that has to be considered as well. That looks a lot different than what we may have used in the past.
Steve, I still believe, you know, again, stating that all the components that are in the BEP should be included in this new formula as well.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think we should be losing components.
Right.
Like when we look at when we talk about the base, and earlier we mentioned, should the base for K2 look different than maybe 9-12? But there are some things, for example, we talk about nurses, SROs, social workers. Like right now, my district had already put SROs in all schools, so none of that money is part of any funding we get except local. So I would want to be sure that those things would be included. If it's being funded now for some, it should be funded for all.
I agree.
I agree as well.
Yeah, the grant system, the SRO grants were kind of a slap to those districts who had stepped out there and those local funding bodies who had stepped out there and put SROs in schools and weren't eligible if you already had them in place to access those funds. So,
could you explain exactly what the thinking is under the bullet that says district level and district-wide supports? What exactly is that?
I think that goes back to what Clint was talking about in the BEP formula. You have instructional supervisors, you have if you need instructional specialists or instructional coaches through the district level, that is considered in that as well.
Where would curriculum fall in all of this?
I think under the district level supports.
Okay, that I was hoping so. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Even the director of schools.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Fox, if you can move on to the weight examples. Yes. All right, so as we talked about weights, this is some of the suggestions that have come up to date. That do we look at poverty or economically disadvantaged? Do we look at students with disabilities? Do we look at English learners? And I think it's important to note that those first three are in all the other states' student-based funding formulas as a weight. So, you know, as we start thinking about must have, should have, like to have, those type things, start trying to identify, you know, what are the must haves, what we should have in the formula or as weights, and what we'd like to have there. Then you go on and see a rurality or sparsity, you know, going back, is there a weight for that? Is there a weight for fast growing? Grade level, K3. Charter enrollment was something that came up as well. Dyslexia, gifted, small district, and again, maybe trying to, if we could get information on the districts, the rank districts, all the 146 districts ranked by enrollment, then we maybe would be able to define what a small district would be considered if that was something we wanted to look at. And then if there's concentrated poverty within a district or something like that, those have been the suggestions to date on there.
Steve, what does concentrated poverty look like? I'm sorry.
I would think that would be, and this is just my interpretation of this, no guidance here, but I would think concentrated poverty would be if you had certain schools where you had extremely high poverty in that school, maybe 80% or more in that school, that might be concentrated poverty, and the students that attend that school might receive an additional weight there. It'd be something like that, I think. Tony, you had your hand? I'm sorry, go ahead, Clint.
I was just saying that's new to, I don't feel that, you know, I got 3 schools and I don't have any schools. So, and I'm not inner city, so I'm sorry. That's why I was asking that.
Right. Tony, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to add, we do an SBV model here as I introduced. So and I'm looking at the list in comparison to how we fund schools. So we got students with disabilities, grade level for our K through 2 literacy, that we, you know, our lower class size ratios for K through 2. So we give a higher base or a higher weight for that. Just looking at student performance, poverty is one, ELL, but then one thing that's missing that I would love to add is mobility. So we have a population of students that you can take one principal school leader that says that, wow, you know, I've had a shift in almost 10%, and, you know, we just have a high mobility, you know, throughout. So I would love to add that one to the list as well.
Okay, we'll capture that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Joey?
So when we're looking at students with disabilities, are we looking at behavioral issues as well in that? I know that we have some kids that are emotionally disturbed, they'll have a background, but more and more we're seeing behavioral issues, alternative schools, behavior classrooms that aren't necessarily tied with students with disabilities. I don't know if that's something to put out there or not, but I know that it's something that is growing.
That's something I think we could actually add to the weight examples here, that maybe if a student is in a alternative setting due to behavior or something. Is there another way you would measure that besides doing that, or?
I think they measure it by maybe the expulsion rates or something like that. I think that data goes to the state. I think a couple years ago, we had a CC, they're calling it the CCEIS, where they were tracking the number of students that we, for expulsions. And so maybe that's something to consider for behavior. But I get what he's saying. That's a great point and a factor, because there's a social emotional aspect that needs to occur with needs as well when considering weights.
And maybe it is the suspension, expulsion, remand. But I know the model most of the days now is trying to keep students from being suspended or expelled and keeping them maybe temporarily in a setting, but trying to work them back into class. But it does take resources to be able to address those behaviors and everything.
That's a very good point on that. I guess at that point, if we've changed our behavior to keep students in class, how do we capture that? So that's a very good point.
Does that capture what you were talking about, Joey?
Yes, sir, it does. And like Tony said, we're trying to keep kids in class, but sometimes we need more support than what we're able to do right now.
Okay. Very good points. That will be recorded and we'll have that for future. Anything else on weights right now? Okay, we can go on to the slide that says student-based formula direct funding examples. Okay, this was kind of, before I saw this slide, was something that I was struggling with, but this would be funding that would be, my understanding of this would be outside the base and the weights and those type things, that we would receive money for the ACT and the ACT retake for high school students. Obviously, the legislature, and very thankfully so, passed the 4 dual credit courses for high school students. And then summer program, and got some information today on summer program. I'll just interject this, is the funding is there for not only the summer program, but the transportation as well. So that's good news to share with everybody. And then career and technical education. Right now within the BEP, we have career and technical education, obviously on staffing ratios, but then we also have consumable materials. So I think that's a good part to kind of move that separate, because you do have a lot higher cost for CTE classes, especially with consumable materials and those type things. Anybody else to think of anything to add here, or?
That feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be addressed somewhere else. We spend a lot of time right now as a state talking about our early grades. We're spending a lot of time talking about CTE, ACT, dual credit courses. Is there anything coming up anywhere about middle school? A lot of kids, we lose grade 6. And that may be somewhere down later. Just wanted to ask that question.
Maybe something we go back and consider with weights. Do we have a middle grades weight?
You know, something just came to mind, Steve, not about weights, but about the base. The BEP doesn't have any allocation for professional development. And I don't know if that's something we need to talk about or put in or don't discuss or whatever, but
I think it's something that we all are aware of that we need, and it's becoming more and more critical. So I think it does need to be part of our discussion.
I think it also goes along, Dr. Starnes, with what we talked about with technology. Like Mr. Tony Williams said, we're expecting our teachers to be these online gurus, and we don't have any professional development for them, really. We don't have any training hardly. So, so we definitely going to need some funds for that, if nothing else. Also to help them with dealing with the mental wellness. I know I sound like a broken record, but I don't know if it was you said this, Dr. Starnes, but our teachers are already May tired, and it's only November, and it's because they are mentally wore out because of things that these students in the past have come with the skills they don't have now because they have not had to do that. Like, for example, at the high school, we're having a huge problem with vaping right now because for the last year and a half, they could vape anytime they wanted at home because their parents were, at work and they're there by themselves and everything else. So I think professional development, if you're not growing, you're dying. So we've got to get that support to our teachers and our staff to be able to take care of some of those problems. So.
Bo, I'm just Mr. I'm not doctor, so, but thank you for.
You'll always be doctor to me, though. I know you got a great hook shot, or used to have one.
Thank you.
Dr. S.
Honorary, I guess, then.
And I agree with the need for more PD. And it may not be a popular thing to say, but just think what 5 additional professional development days would do for teachers' salaries in Tennessee. And we could use 5 days easily.
I think that's a great idea.
I do too.
So making their calendars a 205-day calendar instead of a 200-day calendar, is that what you're?
Or make it 185 instead of 180,
Right.
because how many times have we've all heard this? If I just had an extra week, I'd have been ready. I just need one more week. It always seems like, because there's not enough time in the day. But I think we have to pay those teachers to be there. We cannot continue to demand these teachers to do what they're doing and not compensate them. And it's not so much the monetary value as it is the respect that goes along with that. I mean, but if we went to 185 days and we paid them, I think it'd go a long way.
And may I also add, and I know they did this with ESSER money, but Dr. Fox, all the summer reading, I don't know exactly what summer reading, whatever we had this summer, and almost all of our teachers went, you paid each one of them $1,000 stipend. It wasn't like the state wasn't paying them. So, maybe it's just a reallocation of some funds and adding a little bit to it, but you can't go wrong investing in your people.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, I see your hand up.
Yes, sir. I just want to put for the notes on the weights and just for consideration for like homeless districts with high homeless populations, along with proficiency as well. That's one thing that I just wanted to know, or, just student performance and proficiencies as well. I know that there's additional targeted support funds, but if that can be a consideration in just the weights as well. The second thing I kind of wanted to ask, because the base weight has, to your point, a teacher's salary in there, right? And definitely want to learn more about each year as we get in this funding model. And then we go from the first year implementation to the second year. How does consideration of raises change our base weights? I'm trying to understand the technicality of how this works and just really learning, does the base weight increase? Does the weight increase? Does the funding increase for what is known today as the instructional salary increases and benefits? So just something to learn that I would love to have an understanding of.
I think that is on everybody's mind. That actually came up in a superintendent's meeting I was attending earlier today, is once this is put in place, then how do we keep this from being something that the base doesn't increase for 10 years or something, that there's incremental, potentially cost of living adjustments or something along those lines that we look at. And I think that is important part of the conversation, that do we look at, at least, if at all possible, 1% increase each year or whatever that number is. I just throw something out there. But, and is it some years when we're have done better with revenue that we can increase that, and other years that, just like we all deal with, that the lean years you have to kind of hold steady. But that is something on everybody's radar, that how does that continue to keep up with inflation and those type things.
Steve, Steve, I would pitch, and I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just like going to pitch it and see where it lands. But one of the things in a couple of slides back on top of the pyramid was performance.
We're coming to that.
It's not on that slide, but one of the things that we've done in our district is that the annual increase to baseline pay is tied into their LOE. So the higher the LOE, the more percent that they get. And you know that, I don't know, I'm just pitching that, but when you're looking at performance, you might, instead of looking, I mean, it ties into student performance, but looking at teacher performance and tying that with the increase of teacher salaries.
Very good segue. Dr. Fox, if you'll advance us to the outcomes. There we go. I think that's the first thing that comes to everybody's mind when you talk about outcomes is TN ready data or that kind of stuff. But looking at the outcome examples that they are using, again, tying this back basically to our ready graduate type indicator or our graduation rate, those type things, that you have a student that successfully, completes a certain amount of statewide dual credit or dual enrollment, that passes an AP exam, earns an industry certification, achieves a college-ready level on the ACT. I do think there needs to be additional money because a lot of those industry certifications are very expensive. And right now, there's no mechanism for funding unless you can try to tie that into a Perkins Reserve grant or something else like that, that we're having to do that. Obviously, the ACT test, at least 2 tests have been already taken care of, and then there's some vouchers and available. The AP access on the testing there, you know, does that need to become, we have the dual enrollment, $1,200 setting aside. Do we also need another, or fully funding 4 courses? Do we also need X number of dollars set aside for AP course exams? So that's something to consider there, maybe.
I mean, it sounds like crickets right now, so I'll go ahead and get everybody warmed up. You know, just for us in a small district and, you know, around us, that we really don't put a lot of resources in the AP piece because the pass rate on that, I think, is less than 50% statewide. We put all our eggs in the dual enrollment basket, where traditionally our parents understand that they take the course, pass the course, and get the credit. That has really helped us on the EPSOs and those over there on that side. So I'm not as keen on the AP as I am the dual enrollment pieces, but that's just personal.
I think it's maybe an either or. If they earn college credit, then they should receive the premium or whatever.
I'd like to see that pass rate get higher.
Yes, definitely. One important note here on this is that this funding will be a lagging indicator. This funding would come the following year based on the previous year's performance and these indicator type things here. So hopefully as we've gone through here that we've kind of jogged everybody's mind about what we're thinking about when we talk about each part of the pyramid here. And if there's anything that we need to consider in each of those areas, again, please talk with others and share information, get feedback, and if we can bring that back together, I think it would be important here to think through these. Are there any outcomes here that you think should be added. I think the one thing that we have to be very careful about is that we're all school systems and everything are already being held accountable for performance data. We're going to have the third grade retention law coming up. There's lots of things there. So do we continue to put that in the funding formula too? Or is it already taken care of over here with another piece? Because I think you're going to really look at sometimes a really good teacher could have a class that has come in, for example, next year's third grade class, we know that they will have some deficits because their kindergarten year was interrupted, their first grade year was interrupted, that foundational learning was interrupted. So we know that they're probably not going to perform as well. Obviously, we're working all we can and trying to make up for that unfinished learning and looking at that. But we could see scores that aren't where they're in. And we've had our challenges this year. We've continued to have lots of students either quarantined or isolated or whatever there that have missed instruction this year. So I think that's a reality. So I would be reluctant right now to put TN ready performance in here as an outcome for students right now. Maybe that's a conversation on down the road, but.
Hey, I'm going to chime in one thing. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, good deal. So this is something that has come up in education committee meetings in the past, and usually it's me and maybe one other person that brings it up. Right now, there is a perverse incentive to, if you have a failing high school senior, it is easier to push them into homeschool because that doesn't count against your graduation rate than to actually push them to get that what used to be a GED, whatever it's called now, but to actually get something that they could use to get a job later. So, I mean, it negatively, and that is insane to me, and it really makes me crazy. And so the fact that I don't know, I think at some point we need to consider, and someone will have to remind me what the GED is called now. I know it's changed names, but thank you, HiSET. I can never remember that. But it is bizarre to me that it doesn't count against us to push them into homeschool. And so if you have a failing high school senior, you know they already have a home environment that does not support them in education, typically. So when you push them into homeschool, you're pushing them into oblivion, where they receive nothing. But if you actually help them get a HiSET, it counts against their graduation rate. So I don't know if this may be a good time to address. Look, if you help a failing high school senior at least get a HiSET, that's some extra money. I'm sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that's something we need to look at.
I think all superintendents would be on board with that previous to the change, probably we're getting up, what is it now, 2007, when all this changed with the Graduation Improvement Act, yes. That there was a lot of strong GED programs or HiSET programs that, as you said, allowed students to earn a credential that would give them the opportunity to seek employment and to give them the opportunity to enroll in college, lots of different things, enroll in the military with a GED. So whether that's through the Federal Accountability Act or whether that's through legislation, I don't think you'd have a lot of opposition from superintendents that if that counted as a graduate because that student earned that GED or HiSET and we weren't penalized, that we would be on board. And that's my take. I'll let everybody else speak for themselves on the call.
I think that's an excellent idea, and especially since graduation rate is a lagging indicator, it shows a year later. You know, we give them 4 years in a summer. So if you gave graduates 4 years and a year to get the HiSET and let that come back, and if they got the HiSET, count those as a graduate for a lagging indicator a year later, I think would be an excellent idea. Don't you, Steve? I mean, that seems to be workable.
I think, yeah, we may have to look at, because of the compulsory attendance age, may have to look at 4 years in the summer, but if that student is coming into their 4th year and they've earned 8 credits, obviously we know we're not going to earn more than likely a state minimum diploma. So is it beneficial to that person to divert them into a strong GED program? And when they can pass that, then they earn that credential and count as a graduate.
I also think it'd be very beneficial for districts that are very transient, like we are in Shelby County, but also for high Hispanic populations. I know it's very difficult for us to, when we get students that come in the 8th or 9th grade and we can't get any records unless they're back from 3 or 4 years before. That kid may be 15 years old and they only have records of having a 6th grade education. The chance of that student getting caught up, you don't want to put a 15-year-old in the 6th grade classroom. We know that, but I think this is a great idea that Mark said, that we could benefit our kids. That's what we're here to do, help them be productive citizens. And if it means giving them a GED and giving them a chance to go out there and work and take care of themselves, I think we would all be for that as a superintendent anywhere.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to bring that up here. Just we don't have that listed as one of those measures of success, and maybe it should be. And so part of our problem is the federal definition of graduation rate. But at some point, as a state, we're going to have to say, forget that. And I mean, even if it counts against the graduation rate, whatever small percentage that is, helping someone for the rest of their life is more important than a graduation rate. And so at some point, we have to put some sort of incentive in there for folks to pursue that high set rather than just transferring them into nothingness. So that's all I got. We can move on to the next one.
Thank you. All right. Next thing, couple of things I want to throw out for the group, and these are considered policy questions, and we may not be able to get to an answer today. I'm interested to hear from Kathy and Bruce and some other folks who have experience with this, but we'll have to make a recommendation, I think, whether we use previous year attendance data or current year attendance data. So that's the first measure there. My limited understanding, I think it's hard if you're using current year data. Basically, you're approving a budget and getting that budget approved and starting the year without really knowing the level that you'll be funded on, which I think is concerning to me. But again, I've not had experience with that. If we continue with previous years, as I stated in the first call, I think we're going to have to look at balancing the level of funding between first semester and second semester. That we don't need to receive 30% of our funding based on the first semester enrollment and 70% on the second semester. But I will, Kathy, I know you're ready to jump in there. Go ahead.
Well, I actually would be happy to reach out and get some details on this. I just know that in both Alabama and Colorado, the funding for the current year is the student count on October 1st. And so it was a big push every year in terms of what that enrollment was and what that number was. And then that's how much we were funded. But I'll be happy to reach out. I have a friend who was the CFO in Alabama and Colorado as well. I can get prescriptive details on what this looks like in relation to what you just said, if you would like me to do so.
Please.
Okay. I'll have that for next week or the next meeting.
Yeah, Steve, in my experience in multiple states, my recollection is correct, is it was that current year, because like where I believe Tennessee is headed, we had to post openings in different grade levels and different buildings. And if there was a seat open, that student then could cross the border, if you will, and enter into your school carrying those dollars with that student. So it sounds like we're heading that direction, because they want us to post for every building by grade level number of open seats. And when I was up in Minneapolis, I mean, multiple districts, and we had to compete every single year to make sure we were offering programming to get more students into our district and have less students leave our district. So it definitely is going to create some issues for districts depending on where they're located.
It seems to me too, if we're truly, our intent is to fund based on student needs, student-centered, student-based, that it needs to be the current students we have in our building and not the students that were there a year ago. It might and often do completely change sometimes. I too have seen, I've been in elementary school today, and they have 3 little children in elementary school who are absolutely having violent meltdowns every single day. And this is in one little elementary school. We didn't have that at all last year, at all. And so I just think if truly our goal is to be student-based, student-centered, it needs to reflect the needs of the current students that we are working with. That seems to make sense to me.
Now, this is the other extreme, but I was talking with a person who's superintendent that had worked in California, and this was mentioned during the chair's call as well, that they report attendance every month and that there is a 2-month lag. So you would start August and receive your August funding based on April and May of the previous year. But when you reached October, then you would start receiving funding based on the current year, which I thought was really interesting. But, we all know right now, working with EIS and everything like that, that it's really hard that first month to get firm, good numbers, get everything matching up, balanced, and all those type things. So is that 2-month lag enough time to really get those numbers solid and do that? Or are we better off to continue to stick with either October 1 point in time, or do you look at 2nd and 3rd and 6 and 7 like we're doing in the current year, but then base that on that current year? So I don't know, but that's something I think we're going to have to settle on. And then the second, well, that was it. How often do we collect attendance data? And then do we base that on prior year or current year? Dr. Fox, I guess I'm about 4 minutes now, but
Yeah.
Hopefully today has been a little bit of, I felt like this was helping me understand more when we had the chairs meeting last Friday, seeing some of these examples and kind of framing this conversation. If you would, real quickly, if you got the internet, if you would do a Google search on student weighted funding formulas handbook, I would just share this with you all real quickly, and you can kind of go out and get some kind of ideas about what's out there, because this will be a lot of individual school systems, states. 2019 version of this is actually the includes Metro Nashville and Shelby County, looking at their base and their weights and those type things. And I would be interested to have Tony look at that and see if that is accurate reflection or how that's changed in 3 years. But do you have the ability to pull it up, Dr. Fox?
Yeah, I've got that one forward facing there. Yeah, and you can definitely pull the comparison. You can sort that. And then the link for the Southern Regional Education Board, that's got helpful information as well.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. That one looks at per pupil expenditures, so I guess it kind of masks after. This other website actually has base weights and the actual weights they're using, examples of that.
Okay, we'll put that in a wrap up then. Sounds good.
You said that was what? Student weighted what?
Student weighted funding formula handbook. And there's versions that I was able to find going all the way back to 2009 through 2019. The 2019 version includes Shelby and Metro and State of Hawaii, for example, and lots of other systems, but it'll actually give you a page to show you what the base is, what the multipliers or the weights are, everything. So I thought it was a good visual.
I would love to confirm it. So I definitely will take that as homework.
Thank you, Tony. Anybody else before we wrap up?
I will toggle through a couple of these slides to help us think about moving forward. So you've had great conversation around things that you might want to research further, and then also engaging. Please engage and solicit as much feedback as possible from all the different groups that you might encounter. Just feel free. There's no limit on that outreach, how often you can connect with folks. We don't necessarily have a standardized outreach approach. You have a toolkit with some language that can help you. And I'll be sure to link that. Is in your calendar link also. It's a Google Drive that has a toolkit for resources. You got it. Thank you. That's it. Then this was just continuing to leverage your expertise, and we want to hear your voice, and particularly for that lens of thinking through for school system personnel. So I've had a lot of good conversation. You will be receiving a batch of feedback. I'm sorry we didn't have it ahead of today, but it's on its way. It will be in that Google Drive, so it'll just be loaded there for you. I'll be sure to keep an eye out for it and let your chair know, and he can help tag you as well. But that's where you'll be continuing to sort into these, the conversation you've had today, leaning into the must-haves, the should-haves, nice-to-haves, and then what might be a long shot. But you're still not sure where to maybe categorize it. And we'll be bringing those back and refining those and getting those more crystallized into definitely that would be the base, and it's a must-have to each of those categories. I think you got a great start on thinking through that today. Yeah, and so this just kind of, Chairman Starnes did a great job going through some of that, and we'll continue to do so in the next meeting. Is there anything you would want to add here, sir?
Just thank you to everybody for your participation today and your input. And again, continue to brainstorm and bring ideas to our, hopefully this was productive today, and we were able to kind of start honing in on forming recommendations to present at the end of our time together. But
yeah. We'll get to refine them each time. We can just get those memorialized into, yes, this is a recommendation, but then it'll be iterative. Each time we connect, you'll be able to say, to refine it more, put cost variables and thoughts with that as well. So that discussion continues. Our next meeting is December 8th, same time, same place. You should have a link. So the link to join it's in your calendar invite. If anyone's had trouble, just let me know. I'll be sure to add that in that intro or reminder email just like 24 hours ahead of time to make it easy to click. But it's in your invitation on your calendar. All right.
Thank you, everyone, and probably see all you superintendents in a day or so.
Thank you.